Welcome to the Career Cafe, everybody. This is the Industry Insights Podcast, and I'm glad that you're with us. If you're just here for the first time, this podcast is all about exploring ideas about how to make work better for you. You know, we spend way too much time working for work, not to work. And the amount of time that we spend with our colleagues, things are obviously shifting and changing these days with remote workforces. There's a lot of things that are impacting our ability to have a successful career, gain the career enjoyment that we seek, and just generally do better when we're working. And so on this podcast, we explore a variety of ideas to help you either achieve more of the things that you want in your career or chart a better path to where it is that you're looking to go. And today we're exploring the idea, this episode is called Charting Your Path to the C-Suite. And this episode is not going to be a whole lot different from others in that I've got a very interesting guest. And I've got an individual who's had a very interesting way to navigating his career and arriving as the Chief Financial Officer at the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. My guest today is Victor Pang. And if you don't know Victor, he has been in accounting and finance for over 20 years, working for a variety of very interesting organizations in a number of disparate industries. Victor's a guy who's been able to cross boundaries from one industry to another with relative ease and making career progress along the way. So we're going to explore how he approached that, what were some of the things that he considered when he was making his decisions, get to know a bit more about him and where he's looking to go in the future as well, and things that he's working on that are impacting him now. So with that, I'm really excited to get to know the Chief Financial Officer of the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, Victor Pang. Victor, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here. Let's just start with how 2020, the summer of 2020, has gone for you. Maybe at a very high level, from a business perspective, but then also personally.
Great. So first of all, Jeremy, thank you for inviting me. This is a really interesting time. So would be glad to have a conversation. Yeah, 2020 has been unusual, I guess, for everybody, and for me as well. I work for the Port Authority, and so when the pandemic first happened, our first question is, how do we keep the port running to make sure that to first understand whether how demand is changing as a result of the pandemic, and then making sure that all the different pieces of the port is still going to be working well to allow goods to flow through. So so the entire organization, including me, has been since then and to now, it is now August, spent a lot of time really trying to understand the different pieces that needs to tweak, different pieces that needs to be enhanced, and thinking about our employees, thinking about the port as a whole, thinking about the ultimate folks that we serve, be Canadian businesses, families, trucking industry, shipping industry, the operators of terminals. It's been really interesting. I'd say a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
A lot of moments where it's difficult to read what the next few months are going to pan out. But I think at the end, it ends up being really, really good work, because what it does do is to bring us all together to have this underlying health and safety theme embedded in everything that we do. So in many ways, you end up dealing with folks at a much more personal and caring level, and it does change some of the conversations a little bit. And it's been great. It's unfortunate for a lot of businesses and folks, of course, but in terms of dealing with it as a business challenge, it's been difficult, but in some ways gratifying.
I mean, the pace of change that this forced on every business, the ability to adapt to that. I mean, nobody anticipated this. I mean, we didn't see 2020 going like it has. How have you managed that pace of change and having to shift from one thing to another? I mean, and I know as an executive that is a part of the skill set that you develop, but how has that pace of change just changing priorities and all the influences impacted you, but your team and leadership perhaps as well?
That's a great question. And I think most organizations would say when you roll out something that is new, you have to really think about change management. You have to get people's buy-in. You have to get people to understand the call to action and get people who have a very busy day job to focus on being part of this change journey. COVID-19 removed all of that change management need at the front end.
Yeah.
And and we before the pandemic, we were quite traditional in terms of our workforce, everybody working in the office. So I think we're probably not the only one who realized if we were to make this change to shift everybody to work from home without a pandemic, it would probably take months and months and years and committees after committees and discussions and debates after debates. And at the end, some people would still say, yeah, we can't do it. We're just not that type of a company.
Yeah.
But when you have to do it, you figure it out. And we did it. And just like anybody else, we make an announcement, next day everybody's home. So and I think what that really does is, I think, and we talked about that as a leadership team, how do we harness that energy? How do we harness people's realization that when you need to make a change, we can do it very effectively and very quickly. Sometimes where we get bogged down is our underestimation of our ability to do that ourselves. And so from that standpoint, it was a lot of hard work, but it wasn't that hard at the end of the day. When everybody is focused on it, when everybody is aligned, you can do a lot in a very short time, and that's what happened to us. And I'm sure that's what happened at many other organizations.
I've seen the same type of thing play out in every industry in so many companies, where the thinking was very traditional and conservative, but when you're forced into something out of necessity, you figure it out. And you're right, that question that you were just talking about, how do you harness that? That same thing, I think, on a personal level, right? For people that are listening to this, how do you take that from a personal perspective to make some positive change in your career or things that you're looking at? How do you take that and really implement that to get some power out of the time that you have, right? So
yes.
Are there personal things that you learn that you can integrate into your own approach with that idea? Was there anything that you specifically are going to take from that? Has it amplified anything or underscored anything for you or changed your thinking around anything?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it is as a leader, I think a lot of times you have to find the right balance between, leading versus just letting things happen and just, and delegating and trusting folks. And this is one of those situations because you have to make so many changes in a very short time. You cannot, even if you try to be in on every single little decisions and whatnot, you won't be able to. So I think it's just trusting the folks that you work with, and just and letting go some of those things that otherwise you might ask for a bit of breathing, in the past, and just letting it happen in some ways, and just focusing on, but what are the key things we have to figure out, and then after that, just trust your folks.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I think that's had an impact on us here as well. As you rely on people, right? And I think there's a good healthy way to do that. Let's switch around a little bit and talk earlier in your career. So you didn't start, and you're in accounting and finance now. As long as I've known you, you've been in accounting and finance, but you didn't really start there. Let's talk a little bit about your earlier career. Maybe just walk us through. So you started did you start in law? Was that kind of the idea initially? And that
Yeah.
switched from law into finance. How did that all happen?
Yeah, good question. So my first degree was actually in finance. And so I went to business school and went to UBC and did my finance degree, but decided I didn't want to grow up yet, so I wanted to continue being a student. And and a friend of mine who's 1 year senior in school, I ran into her during my third and fourth year, and then and she was in law school, so we started chatting about it, and that really intrigued me. So I thought, hey, law school sounds really, really interesting. So I did my law degree, and but in the back of my mind, I've always, while I was in law school, I was thinking, do I go, do I come out of school to pursue a career in law or in finance? In the end, I realized that finance and business is more of my passion, and that's why I went back to finance. But I did take a bit of a detour, if you will. It was a lot of fun. I'm one of those people who I really envy people who at 5 or 7 years old say, I know I want to be this. I never knew. And
that's a minority. It really is.
I never knew. So even throughout university, I took business as something that is general sort of, because I didn't have the one thing that I wanted to do. So I just wanted to keep my options open. Law also opened that up. But through kind of doing some summer jobs and also having articled, because I decided, why not articled and just check that box as well. I found out that what I really, truly have a passion for is to work in an industry in a finance capacity, because I find running a business very intriguing. And so yeah, but it took me some time to figure that out, and it's, and no looking back since.
The initial idea though was finance then. In my mind, I thought, for some reason, I thought that it was the legal path that you pursue, but it was initially finance. You supplemented that with the legal piece of things, and you spent, so you articled, talk a little bit about your time in law before going back into finance.
Yeah, sure. So I finished my undergrad in business. Then I went to law school. After my first year, I realized, I really need to figure out what I want to be when I coming out of law school. So I actually took a year off from law school to get some real working experience. So I'm originally from Hong Kong, and so I left law school after the first year, took a leave of absence, and I flew to Hong Kong, and I just started looking for work and landed with HSBC, so finance, interestingly, and was in one of their kind of a management slash junior executive programs were very in vogue at the time. So I got into one of those, and ended up working at a branch, and managing a retail operation at a branch. And that gave me 1 year of solid working experience to help me figure out what I like. Then that was enough in terms of sort of what I was looking for. So I came back and finished my law school, and then, but pretty much I knew, I would go back to business, but I really thought law would be a very important background to have. Then the next decision is, do I article, do I not article? So I did not really make a decision. I just went with the articling interviews, and just see what happens. And I was fortunate and quite lucky to get into got an articling position with McCarthy Tétrault, which is a very prestigious national firm. So I thought, okay, well, then why not do that? And I was kind of 50-50, do I stay, do I not stay? Luckily not stay. And at the end, I told him, yeah, you know what, I like to get my article, but I'm going to go back to finance after that. And so I did.
So it sounds like trial and error through some of this. Did you have anyone that you were bouncing your decisions off of? Was there a mentor or other people that you were saying, hey, people that you trusted as an advisor through this? Or was it in your mind that you were playing different scenarios out and finding out about yourself and what you enjoy? Can you talk to us about what your thought process was? Because I think that's something that someone would be would be, how do I take that and apply that to my own situation?
Great question. I did have people that were I talked to a lot. I talked to a lot of people about it. I talked to my parents. I talked to my friends. In particular, while I was summering in one of the law firm, one of the younger lawyer who had a similar background, who went to business and did law, and she was fantastic, and she she kind of saw me as kind of a young person that she wanted to help and mentor. So I had a lot of conversations with her and try to understand, what's it like being in a legal practice and whatnot. So all of that helped. But I think at the end, as you say, it's trial and error and actually living it.
Yeah.
And experiencing it. I often find that these kind of decisions, they are difficult to make, but when you know, if you try to, I've tried to sit down at my desk, put a piece of paper down, and 2 columns, pros and cons, and
Right. Yeah.
You can do that, and it's helpful, but once you have lived it, you kind of know. When you feel it, when you experience it, when you smell it, So it was one of those things. I believe that, if I try out different things, I don't need to say on August 31st, I'll sit down with a piece of paper and I'll figure this out.
Sure.
Somehow, one day you wake up and you would have just made your decision because you would have felt it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because with this episode, we're calling Charting Your Path to the C-Suite. When we talk about charting a path from a career perspective, you're right. I mean, having a sequential order of operations, I'm going to do A, then B, then C. I've talked to people who've tried to approach it that way, and I'm not saying it can't work, but it doesn't sound like that's what you did. It was experiential. It was self-reflection, trial. Does that sound fair?
I think so. Yeah. I completely agree with you. I mean, for me, it was not as sequential as that, but I think maybe it's a mix because you want it to be somewhat intentional as well. So even when you're trying things out, I think it's important to have a general direction.
Right.
Correct. I knew I didn't want to go into the arts. I knew I didn't want to, I did not go into the medical field or, so, and then be intentional about, okay, well, I might know I want to be here, but I need to find this path. So how do I do that?
I think that's really valuable to talk about because there's definitely, as humans, there's definitely an emotional element. But I've seen people who just followed their emotion and just kind of bounced around. You're talking about a framework and some intention around what you're trying to do, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you do you recall how that and maybe you still use it today, but that having that intent or that framework, what does that look like? How do you suggest one establish that?
I think everybody is very different, and what works for me may not work for others. But for me, I'm not a detailed planner by nature, anyways. And my wife can give you many proofs. So
Actually, I find that interesting. As a senior finance guy, someone for financial planning and analysis, strategic planning, law, those sound like very detailed. Like that would be a requirement.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I can be very detailed in certain things, but in terms of planning out what have all the steps in front of you, I'm not that person. For one good example is, if you're into, you might do coding, you might, or you might be working on Excel spreadsheet, or you might be working on a piece of art. All that requires a lot of detail. If you're coding line by line and word by word. But some people approach it in a more iterative approach, and you can start out say, okay, I have my I have the big picture, I know what I need to get to, but I don't need to plan out my 10 steps to get there. I plan out my first 3 steps, and I'll iterate from there. But some people like to have a more detailed plan. There's no good or bad. It's just kind of your sometimes it's your nature, and then you have to understand your nature and compensate when compensation is called for. But so yes, so finance does need detail. The question is, do you detail plan things? And my nature is not to have that much detail in my plan. So when it comes to career kind of thinking, I normally ask myself roughly where I want to be 3 to 5 years from now. I try not to think too much beyond that in detail, and just focus on, okay, well, next 3 to 5 years, I want to, check these boxes, or I want to, have achieved this, and making sure that I'm still on the general direction that I'm pointing to, and sometimes actually deliberately taking some diversion from a functional standpoint, just
how
to broaden the experience.
Victor, how frequently are those ideas running through your mind? I found that individuals that are more career oriented, those ideas live in their mind probably more frequently than someone who's motivated by other things in life. Career isn't a primary focus for them. Have you found that career has been a significant focus for you?
I would say yes. I would say, I do think that I have a relatively good work-life balance, but the question is whether your overall career plan and your career goal is in the background relatively constantly, or whether you're always focusing on the work at hand and only thinking about your overall career plan only at certain points in time in some interval. And I think for me, it's a constant background.
Yeah.
It may not take up a lot of your bandwidth, because 99.9% of your mind is on the task at hand, or what your role calls for. But I think having that background is important, because sometimes opportunities come up. So you want to be you want to have a awareness of your career goals, so that when those opportunities pop up, you can react to it with your career goal in mind.
So has it been a kind of a constant, like background music or a constant buzz, or are there events during a year or every couple of years where you sit down and specifically think career planning, where do I want to go? And maybe it's a part of a larger life type evaluation process. Has that been something, or has it just constantly kind of been there for you in the background?
It's more the latter, is constant in the background. Yeah. And I think that there were maybe 1 to 2 points in my life where I really want to ask myself, do I want to reset? And that's when I would sort of really sit down, go by what color is your purple, what color is your parachute, and do that. But otherwise, it's kind of been in the background.
What are you working on? Is there anything that you're specifically working on right now from a career perspective, where that's kind of producing that constant buzz in the background for you from a career perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in right now. I think it's really our organization is growing. Our organization is growing in our business as well as complexity. So right now, a lot of my thinking is about how do I round out the skill set that I need to have, and the way that I manage our business to help us grow. So a lot of my thinking, for the past little bit has been on that. Yeah.
Let's completely shift gears here and talk about music. Is it fair to call you a musician or a composer?
I guess so, in a very amateur way, yes.
So tell us a little bit about what you do. Like it's a hobby. You've written music. Just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's been something that I've done more when I was younger, and then sort of on and off, and at times when you're busy or you stop doing it for a while. But and I'm sort of writing a little bit more now, but more for fun. But when as I said, I'm originally from Hong Kong, so and I've written some music that this is back in the late '90s now. And you would still send demo tapes to cassette tapes
Yeah.
to record companies and publishers. And I was lucky enough to have a few songs published and were recorded by well-known artists in that market. And so that's something pretty cool. And it's funny because you talk about career choices. I did at some point consider whether music is something I wanted to do as a career. So that actually was part of the options too, if you will.
Right. Yeah. It's and I think that's you said before that you weren't one of those people who always knew what they wanted to do. There are people. It's what I call the Gretzky Factor. For anyone who's a hockey fan and knows Wayne Gretzky, he always knew he wanted to be a hockey player.
Yes.
There are musicians who just know that that's exactly what they're going to do.
Yeah.
I think there's a big number of people where it's not as clear, and they have something like that, whether it's acting or music or the outdoors or whatever, and they pursue that for a very long time and never achieve the level of success that they probably hoped that they could. So how did you shift away? Like, were you just not drawn to that enough or as much, or how did you evaluate? Because that artistic, it sounds fun. Like music sounds more fun than finance or law. So how did you balance that? And not that I'm poo-pooing finance or law, but I think you know what I'm saying here. How did you balance that for you?
Yeah, good question. First of all, I mean, if maybe if my passion in music or something else was really that strong, like Gretzky, then maybe I would, have already pursued that. But because for me, it was not as strong or as maybe uniquely strong. I do find, my job to be equally as fun as, when I do music. I really do. And so even from a fun factor, it was a pretty, it was a legitimate choice for me. But at the end, I kind of thought, my job might be fun, but if I leave music as my hobby and my passion, it feels easier to achieve than during the day I go work on my go to the office and whatnot, and then music is my hobby, and that's how I wind down. But if I turn music into a career, what do I do in my downtime? Go crank a spreadsheet.
Whatever works for you.
So to me, it felt like, if this is a hobby, maybe I should keep it as a hobby, because once I have to, turn that into work, it may or may not be as fun anymore. And that was just how I was thinking at the time. I don't know if that's true. That was just my logic.
Well, I when I was a kid, I wanted to make it to the NHL. I wanted to be a hockey player. I got to a point where I just realized, Jeremy, you're just not good enough. You don't have enough talent to get there. Yeah. And it was understanding, okay, how do you take what you are good at and being able to amplify that? So that personally, that's how it's like, hey, listen, you just don't have the skill set to get there, right? It's like, I've used the example before. I mean, because passion is talked a lot about in careers. It's like, imagine if a Shaquille O'Neal was really passionate about becoming a jockey. He could never become a jockey, no matter how much he loved it and wanted to be a jockey. He'd never be a jockey. So I think at some point you have to realize where your limitations are and using that to help chart your path as well.
That's a great example.
Yeah, like just a mental picture of it, right? I'd like to ask you what I like to ask almost all my guests. Are there things that you've learned along the way, Victor, that you now know that had you known them earlier, you would have made different decisions or approached things differently? Maybe all your decisions have worked out exactly how you thought, but are there things, lessons that you've learned along the way that would help change some of those things?
That's a good question. I would say nothing comes to mind in terms of how it would have changed my career trajectory, if you will, because maybe I would have taken a different path. Maybe I would have, but you never know, because you might have taken one decision and you say, oh, you know what? In retrospect, that maybe let's say hypothetically you join a company for X, Y reason, and then maybe you think back and say, yeah, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But then if you think deeper, well, but being in that company actually brought you some other things that open up other doors. So it's actually really hard to tally that up.
Have a
But I
crystal
think,
ball. Yeah.
yeah, but I think if there's one thing I kind of think back is I think be more patient. I think when I say I often think about where I picture where I want to be in 3 to 5 years. There were times in my career when I said, oh, I didn't quite hit that, and that bothered me. And But somebody smarter later told me, look, Victor, career progression is not a steady year by year visible progression. It's not it's a few big step changes.
Right.
And
Not a
the
linear
timing of
process necessarily.
pardon me?
It's not a linear process necessarily.
Exactly. It's very nonlinear. So it's great to have a goal for 3 to 5 years, but it's not like you can say, okay, I'm now at 95% of my goal. I'm not at 65. If you haven't hit that step yet, you haven't hit that step yet. So
Yeah.
so I think understanding that and having that patience, I think is looking back. I think that's what I would have told my younger self.
Okay, excellent. For somebody who aspires to become a CFO in their life or to the C-suite, regardless of what their function is, if upward progression, senior leadership is something that they aspire to, are there specific skills that you suggest that they work on now to acquire and build? Above and beyond, so I mean, obviously there needs to be a certain level of technical proficiency,
Yes,
whatever your function is. What about the other skills that they need to acquire and build?
that's a great question, and I think I would say a couple of things. One is to your point, we assume that there's the technical professional proficiencies there. Um, but in there, I think one of the way to think about it is to think about having a set of tools, even within your function. Know your strength, know the areas that you may not be the strongest at, and then figure out how you want to build on that. Meaning,
Okay.
sometimes when we look at our skill set, we may focus on, okay, I have 5 strengths and I have five areas that I can work on to be better. And then sometimes it's easy to just focus on those 5 things and bring them up. That may be a great strategy, but maybe not. Maybe the things that you're relatively, not as good at is already at a level that is good enough. Maybe what you need is to actually build on your strength and actually up that even more. So I think to have a bit of a strategy on that. Another way says, do you want to be a specialist or do you want to be a generalist? But the world is not as simple as that. It's not like I'm the specialist on one thing and then I'm generalist on everything. You could be an ultra specialist on one thing, and you can be highly proficient on two other things, and you can be very average on another 10. Or so having a bit of an idea how to differentiate yourself with that tool set, how you balance the tool set. I think that's one thing that is, and make that a little bit intentional. I think would be good. The
So
second,
what's the, so with that idea, sorry, where's the greatest opportunity for you? Is it to amplify your strengths or minimize your weaknesses, or try and bring where your weaknesses up to a point, or where are you going to get a greater benefit? Am I understanding you correctly?
correct. So and then that depends on the field you're in, and that depends on where you want to go, and that depends on your experience. So for me, the application of that is, I've spent a lot of my early career in financial planning analysis. I've never really done a real accounting type function. And so at some point I started to think about, what are the different boxes that I needed to check to get to C-suite. And at some point I was quite intentional to try to get the opportunity to do investor relations. So, because in my situation, based on my background and my history and where I want to go, I knew that I needed to check more boxes. If I became even more built more expertise in the financial planning, I don't think that would have had the same impact as checking another box. So again, everybody's kind of different, but it's about assessing your situation and kind of thinking about that intentionally. The second thing I think is to when you're in the C-suite, 90% of your time, my son asked me, "Dad, what do you do?" I said, "I go to meetings." and so at the end, you spend most of your time interacting with people, and your effectiveness becomes very much relied on your ability to influence people in different ways, in different settings, in different forums. So and earlier in our career, that the number of people that we work with and we have to influence tends to be sort of a smaller group, and they also tend to be people who look and think more like ourselves.
Sure.
We're the same team of recruiters, we're the same team of finance people, we're the same team of engineers, we're the same team of musicians, kind of thing. So start thinking about how do I interact with people who actually who might have a very different way of thinking, but how do I get them to get what I'm trying to communicate? Yeah.
The people part of the equation.
Yes.
Influence skills. Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I found over the years as a business owner, that again, out of necessity, you're thrust into a situation and you're negotiating a contract, or you're dealing with a lawyer, or there's all sorts of other things that are thrust upon you that you navigate through, that you find out where some of those gaps are, and you have to pay attention to that to be able to navigate through it. Victor, as we bring things, we kind of wind things down here, I just want to talk to you about you mentioned your son, your family. We talked very, very briefly about work-life balance. How do you fit all the different things that are, a requirement of your time into your day? You mentioned you think you have got some good work-life balance as well. You had a very demanding role.
Yeah, it's not easy. It really isn't easy. And I think to achieve it, the way I do it is, if I let myself to go there, I will be working nonstop. So the only way I've learned how to do it is you just force yourself. You say, okay, I'm shutting down now, because there's never a good time.
Right.
There really isn't. So and we talk about the pandemic and how this is likely going to lead to more people working from home, and so perhaps with more flexible hours, that line is going to blur for a lot more people, and so it's not like when I'm in the office I work, when I'm home I am not working. So we need to be a lot more intentional how we split that. And the only way I know is I just say, okay, I'm shutting down now, and and have the discipline to not sort of. I do still peek at my phone, so
not to, yeah.
So I don't exactly, but but that's fine because that works for me, because I'm, you to kind of learn, for myself, what is the equilibrium for me. And for me is, okay, if I still sort of follow what's going on my email, but being able to not deal with it unless it's a real emergency, and that works for me. But for other people, maybe they don't even want to look at a phone, and that's fine. But it's kind of find your own balance. But it has to be, for me, where it's not natural, so I have to force something that is a little unnatural to make it work.
Right. Yeah. I think, again, something that people need to figure their way through. Well, Victor, I really appreciate the time. You're on vacation right now. You're giving your time over vacation. So anyone who's listening to this, I think, is going to walk away with some good pieces of information to help make better career decisions. So I really do appreciate that. So we'll take it from there. I guess the final question is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is particularly important for someone who's career-minded to keep in their mind as they're charting their path? Is there any one piece of information that's either been particularly valuable for you or you think others should integrate into what they do?
Help other people.
Help other people.
Help other people. When you focus on helping others, your doors will open.
That's great. And that could be a segue into a whole nother episode. That's great. I'll let people kind of think through that in terms of how that can how helping other people will eventually, ultimately will help you. It'll help develop your skill sets. It'll help you have richer experiences, all things that are incredibly valuable. So, Victor, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy.
The listeners. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Take care. Bye.